Instead of the brother-to-brother or community charities practiced by the early lodges, charities became officially sponsored and very big business. Masonic homes, medical and research programs, the shrine hospitals, and others would grow into multi-million-dollar businesses that would require an ever-expanding amount of capital to support. Again, this was not a burden, as long as more and more new Masons joined every year. While these programs were laudable and beneficial to society, along with being very high-profile advertising for the craft, it became a simple matter of writing a check to the charity or deducting donations out of dues money. Instead of encouraging Masons to think about the tenets of the institution, relief and charity became something that was done automatically by the organization, and not from the heart of the Mason, and may perhaps meet with death. The social upheavals of the Vietnam era brought a grinding halt to fraternalism in America. The vast majority of young men of the 1960s and 70s would grow up to reject the institutions venerated by their fathers and grandfathers, and the number of candidates knocking on Freemasonry's doors slowed to a trickle. Massive lodges with 700 and 800 members would dwindle or close in less than 2 decades. The appendant bodies that relied on the lodges for new members would find themselves in even worse shape. Scottish Rite and Shrine auditoriums designed for 1,000 candidates would have only a handful at their convocations. The Shrine removed the requirement of York or Scottish Rite membership as a prerequisite for joining, and flirted with dropping their association with Freemasonry altogether. Lodges became dominated by ritualists, the old guard of members who remembered the boom years, who were resistant to change. Dues overall remained at unconscionably low levels, often driven by a desire not to alienate the swelling ranks of retired members. Actuarial tables marched inexorably forward, and as time passed, the lodges were overwhelmingly populated by ever-aging members, further contributing to the appearance that Masonic lodges were places no man under 30 would ever consider. Lodges closed or merged. Buildings were sold. More damaging was the loss of prestige and knowledge of the craft in the public consciousness. Less than 100 years after the formation of the Grand Lodge in England, the whole of the civilized world knew who and what Freemasons were and what they stood for. Yet only 60 years after World War II, fewer and fewer people in society knew what a Freemason was, or that the fraternity still existed. Freemasonry today stands in the unenviable position of being forgotten by almost 3 generations of men. Unlike our European brethren who constantly battle with anti-Masons, society in the United States has not turned against us or held us responsible for world domination. We've simply been ignored and cast on the heap with Etzels, 8-track tapes, and buggy whips. Lodges, at last coming to grips with the severity of the decline, had pleaded with Grand Lodges for help. In response, they've been granted the right to solicit new members, raise multiple candidates, advertise, hold one-day classes, reduce proficiency, and more. But the simple fact is that the groundswell of members who joined around World War II in record numbers were a statistical aberration, never to be repeated. The truth is that as a ratio to the U.S. population, almost the same percentage of the population are Freemasons today as in the years immediately after the Civil War. A tide is turning, and more young men are rediscovering Freemasonry. They first learn of it through unlikely sources: History Channel exposés, sensational and largely fictitious popular books such as Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code and Solomon Key, films like National Treasure, or even unflattering ones like From Hell or The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Even ridiculous references like The Simpsons' Stonecutters have made young minds curious. But instead of finding a relative or a neighbor who might be a Mason, they're turning to the internet for their information. It is increasingly common for the first knock on our doors to be an electronic one. If the numbers hold constant, there appears to be a growing interest once again in Freemasonry, so the question that faces us now is, what will these new men find when they enter our lodges? We were once the premier gentlemen's fraternity in the world, but after decades of throwing the doors open to anyone and everyone, diminishing our standards and allowing our temples to crumble both literally and figuratively, what can we do to stop the downward spiral of mediocrity we seem to have embraced out of desperation? And so we return to the question set forth by Dwight Smith. because the problems he identified in 1964 bore fruit. We're now suffering a crisis in the fraternity precisely because no one heard Smith's wake-up call and presented solutions to the problems he cited. What follows are proposals to listen at last, learn from past missteps, and most important of all, to act. For Radio Freemason and the Knights of the North, this is Jeff Naylor.